Hey guys, I've been lurking here for a while, but never thought I'd be the guy spilling his guts about his wrecked marriage. My name's Jack. I'm 33 and I live in sunny California. I've been married to Emily, 31, for 5 years. No kids, thank God for small mercies, as I'll explain. I'm posting this here because I don't know where else to turn, and maybe my story can help someone else avoid the hell I've been through. Emily and I met through mutual friends at a barbecue. She was vibrant, funny, and confident. Honestly, I fell hard. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she looked at you. She was ambitious too. She worked in marketing and dreamed of running her own agency someday. I was working my way up in finance, grinding through long hours at a big company where I was determined to make my mark. We got married after 2 years of dating. At first, everything was great. We had a cozy place in LA, and while we didn't have much free time with our careers, we made it work. We laughed a lot. She'd surprise me with home cooked meals, even though she hated cooking, and I'd bring her flowers just because. We were the kind of couple that annoyed our single friends because we seemed so damn perfect together. But as you can probably guess, cracks started to form. It was subtle at first. Emily became more secretive with her phone. She'd never been like that before. When I asked, she'd roll her eyes and tell me I was being paranoid. Then came the late nights at work. Big project, she'd say, brushing off my questions with a kiss and a quick, "You're cute when you're jealous." For a while, I convinced myself I was overthinking it. After all, I trusted her. Or at least, I wanted to. Looking back, the signs were all there, but I was blind. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. Anyway, that's how it started. I'll write more soon. There's a lot to unpack. Buckle up, because things get messy. After a few months of these subtle changes, I started noticing Emily was always preoccupied. She'd zone out during conversations or get snippy over the smallest things. I remember one evening I asked her how her day went, and she snapped, "Why do you always interrogate me?" That was weird because we used to talk about everything. Then there were the work trips. They started popping up more often. At first, I didn't think much of it because her job could be demanding, but the details didn't add up. She'd say she was in San Diego for a conference, but her Instagram story showed a fancy restaurant that didn't look like San Diego at all. When I asked, she laughed and said, "Huh, you're stalking me now?" I laughed it off too, but something in my gut felt off. It wasn't just her behavior at home. Emily used to be super affectionate, always holding my hand, giving me those random kisses on the cheek. That stopped. She started going to bed earlier, claiming she was exhausted. But when I checked my phone later, I'd see her online, on Instagram or WhatsApp. Once I asked why she was still awake, and she said, "Oh, just scrolling mindlessly." Go to sleep. I started to feel like I was living with a stranger. My wife, the woman who used to light up every room she walked into, now seemed like she couldn't wait to get away from me. I tried talking to her about it once, told her I felt like we weren't connecting anymore. She sighed, shook her head, and said, "You're imagining things, Jack. Work's just been crazy." It felt like she had this invisible wall between us, and I couldn't figure out why. To make matters worse, my boss, Matt, suddenly took an interest in my life. Matt's in his late 40s, and he's one of those alpha types. Big house, flashy car, always bragging about his achievements. I'd worked for him for years, but he'd never been overly friendly. Now, he was asking about Emily, making jokes about keeping her happy while I worked late. I brushed it off as his usual obnoxiousness, but it stuck with me. Why was he bringing her up so often? This was the point where my paranoia really kicked in. But I still didn't have any proof. I told myself I was being insecure, that Emily wouldn't betray me like that. I kept brushing off the red flags, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. So Emily's work trips became a regular thing. She'd leave early Friday morning and come back late Sunday night, always with a chipper attitude like she'd just had the most productive weekend ever. I asked her once why her job was suddenly requiring so much travel. She smirked and said, "You want me to stay stagnant? Growth takes sacrifice, babe." I hated how she made me feel guilty for even asking. But again, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I mean, she'd never given me a reason to doubt her before, right? Wrong. I just didn't know it yet. Then one day, I noticed something strange. Emily had bought new lingerie. Not just any lingerie, stuff that was way fancier and racier than anything she'd ever worn for me. And here's the kicker. I only found out because I accidentally opened her package from Victoria's Secret thinking it was something I'd ordered. When I brought it up, she laughed and said, "Can't a woman treat herself? Don't read into everything." But I was reading into everything now. Her explanations started feeling rehearsed, like she'd anticipated my questions. Then there was Matt, my boss. His comments about Emily were getting bolder. At our weekly team meeting, he made some offhand joke about all the lucky husbands out there who have wives holding down the fort. Everyone laughed, but he was looking directly at me. It felt intentional. That night, I brought it up to Emily. I told her about Matt's comment, expecting her to be as creeped out as I was. Instead, she shrugged and said, "He's probably just joking. You're reading too much into it." Her reaction bugged me. Emily was the kind of person who'd call out someone for being inappropriate in a heartbeat. Why was she suddenly brushing it off? I decided to test the waters. One night, while she was scrolling on her phone, I casually asked, "Hey, have you ever met Matt? Like at a company event or something?" She didn't even look up. "I think so, maybe. Why?" "Just curious," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Her answer felt off. I mean, how do you forget meeting my boss? That was when I started paying more attention. I wasn't proud of it, but I started snooping. Nothing crazy, just little things, like checking her Instagram stories for inconsistencies or glancing at her texts when she left her phone unlocked. I didn't find anything concrete, but her behavior was making me more suspicious by the day. The final straw came when Emily came home one night wearing perfume I didn't recognize. It was strong and floral, completely different from the citrusy scent she usually wore. I asked her about it, and she froze for half a second before laughing nervously. "Oh, I tried something new at Sephora. You don't like it?" It wasn't just the perfume. It was the way she said it, like she was scrambling for an excuse. I couldn't shake the feeling anymore. Something was definitely going on. I just didn't know how to prove it. After that awkward conversation with Emily about her work dinner, which her coworker Karen denied even happened, I couldn't stop the nagging suspicion in the back of my mind. But I didn't have proof yet. All I had were weird feelings, small inconsistencies, and Emily's growing mood swings. That week, her behavior took another turn. She started being overly sweet, like saccharine levels sweet. I'd come home to candles lit, wine poured, and Emily in her favorite dress. She'd act like nothing was wrong, kissing me on the cheek and asking about my day. At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe this was her way of trying to reconnect with me after a stressful period at work. But then there was the phone. One night, Emily was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I'd never been the snooping type, but something inside me said, "Check it." I hesitated. She'd been more secretive with her phone lately, always turning it upside down or keeping it locked with her new passcode. But that night, she'd left it unguarded. I walked over and glanced at the screen. It was a notification from WhatsApp. "Matt, you're gorgeous. Wish I could see you now." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Was this my boss, Matt? What the hell was going on? Before I could open the app, the notification disappeared and the lock screen returned. I heard the water stop in the shower and panicked, stepping away from the phone. Emily came out a few minutes later, wrapped in a towel, acting like nothing had happened. I tried to play it cool, but I couldn't stop replaying that message in my head. The next day, I decided to start keeping tabs. I wasn't proud of it, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. Emily's work trips were still happening, and her phone was off limits. I figured if she was hiding something, it would eventually slip through the cracks. A few days later, I got my chance. Emily left her laptop open while she went to grab coffee with a friend. She had a bunch of browser tabs open, and one of them was her email. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through her inbox, half expecting to find nothing. But then I saw a thread labeled Personal Matt. Sitting right at the top, I clicked it. The first few emails were tame, but as I scrolled further down, my breath caught in my throat. There were pictures. Naked pictures of Emily. taken in our bedroom. One of them even had the corner of my nightstand in the shot. My head was spinning. The emails were filled with flirty banter and suggestive comments like, "Can't wait for our next trip. Last time was incredible." And "You looked amazing in that black dress yesterday, but I prefer you like this." I didn't know what to do. I felt frozen, like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. But I didn't confront her, not yet. I forwarded the emails and photos to myself, closed the laptop, and sat there in silence. I needed time to figure out my next move. This was the moment when I realized my life wasn't just slipping out of my control, it was being torn apart. Let me tell you, the night after finding those emails was one of the hardest of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pictures. Emily's smile, the same bed we'd shared, and Matt's smirking face, his smug comments from work echoing in my mind. But I still didn't confront her. I wanted to, believe me, but I knew I needed more proof, more understanding. I wanted to know just how far this betrayal went. So I started playing detective. Emily's laptop had already given me a lot, but her phone, that was where the real action would be. I just needed a way to get into it. The next day, I told her I'd be working late. In reality, I left work early, parked down the street from her house, and waited. Sure enough, Emily left not long after, dressed way too nicely for someone who was just grabbing drinks with the girls. I followed her, feeling ridiculous and pathetic. But I had to know. So, she pulled into a hotel parking lot. Not a nice one. One of those mid-tier places that scream business meeting, but not the kind you'd actually want to host at. I waited until she went inside, then followed. She didn't see me. I kept my distance. But I watched her go into the bar, where she met Matt. I felt like I was going to be sick. They didn't even try to hide it. They hugged, and then Matt kissed her on the cheek. She laughed, that same laugh she used to reserve for me. They got drinks, sat at a corner table, and leaned in close. I snapped a couple of photos on my phone. Blurry, but enough to prove it was them. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. Watching them felt like driving a knife deeper into my chest. But I had what I needed, physical proof of their meeting. It wasn't just work. It wasn't innocent. That night, I didn't go home right away. I parked by the beach and sat in my car, staring at the waves. A million thoughts raced through my head. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak. I kept thinking about all the little lies Emily had told me, all the times I doubted myself instead of her. I felt like a fool. When I finally got home, she was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I didn't say a word. I just lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the hell my life had come to this. The next day, I decided to take things a step further. I'd found a private investigator online, a guy named Greg who specialized in domestic issues. I gave him all the information I had, the emails, the photos, the hotel. He promised to dig up everything he could on Matt and Emily. At work, I started paying closer attention to Matt, watching the way he moved, the people he talked to. He didn't even seem nervous. He acted like a man who thought he was untouchable. And it made my blood boil. If I thought I'd seen the worst before, I was dead wrong. It had been about a week since I hired the private investigator, Greg. I hadn't heard much from him yet, but he assured me he was making progress. Meanwhile, at home, Emily was as sweet as ever, acting like the perfect wife. It was disgusting. She even suggested we go on a weekend getaway to reconnect. I played along, smiling, pretending everything was fine. Inside, though, I was seething. I knew the truth was lurking just beneath the surface. I just needed Greg to pull it all together. The bombshell came on a Thursday evening. I was at work late when Greg called. His tone was serious, almost apologetic, like he hated what he was about to tell me. "Jack," he started, "I've got everything you need, and it's worse than you think." He sent over a file containing photos, emails, and logs of their meetings. I opened it on my laptop in my office, and let me tell you, my hands were shaking the entire time. There were more naked photos of Emily taken in different hotels. I recognized the lingerie from the Victoria's Secret package. In some of the shots, Matt was in the background, shirtless, grinning like the smug bastard he is. The timestamps lined up with all her so called work trips. There were texts, too, explicit ones, where they talked about their encounters, joked about lying to me, and even made plans for the future. The worst part? They weren't just sleeping together. Matt had been promising her career opportunities. In one message, he told her, "Once I get that promotion, I'll make sure you're taken care of. You won't need him anymore." Him. That's how he referred to me, like I was some afterthought, a placeholder. Um, I sat there, staring at the screen, my chest tight, my vision blurry with rage. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a conspiracy. Emily had sold me out for a better job, for promises from a man who clearly saw her as nothing more than a fling. Yeah, I stayed late at the office that night trying to figure out what to do. Confront her, expose Matt at work, burn it all down? Um, when I finally got home, it was past midnight. Emily was awake, scrolling through her phone in bed. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, you're late." "Long day?" I go look at her. "Yeah." A long day. I wanted to scream at her, to throw the evidence in her face, but I held back. I wasn't ready yet. If I was going to confront her and Matt, I needed to make sure I came out on top. The next morning, I called Greg again. I wanted more. I wanted dirt on Matt that would do more than just ruin his affair. I wanted to ruin him. He was carrying around 16 investor portfolios, 16 of which were massive. After finding out everything, my emotions were all over the place: rage, heartbreak, humiliation. But one thing became clear: I wasn't going to let Emily or Matt walk away unscathed. They had both wrecked my life, and I was going to return the favor. The day after Greg gave me the file, I sat in my office and started planning. Confronting Emily right away would have been satisfying, sure, but I didn't want this to end with just an argument. I wanted consequences, real ones, for her, for Matt, for everyone who thought they could make a fool out of me. I asked Greg to dig deeper into Matt's life, and oh boy, did he deliver. Turns out Matt wasn't just screwing over his employees' personal lives, he was screwing over the company too. Greg uncovered shady financial dealings. Matt was skimming money off the top of certain accounts, funneling it into a private fund under a fake name. He also had a history of harassing female employees, which HR had swept under the rug. Scrutiny's this wasn't just ammo. It was a freaking bomb. Next, I reached out to HR. Carefully. I told them I'd stumbled on some troubling behavior from Matt, specifically about his treatment of employees. I left out Emily for now. I didn't want to muddy the waters just yet. HR was interested but cautious, asking for evidence. I told them I'd provide a comprehensive report soon. While I was working this angle, I also started setting up a private meeting with our company's legal team. Matt might have been my boss, but I'd been at the company long enough to know who really held the power. And let's just say executives don't take kindly to embezzlement. Emily was completely oblivious to what was coming. She was still acting like everything was fine, throwing around fake smiles and talking about future plans like she hadn't been betraying me for months. It was disgusting to watch. One evening, she casually mentioned another work trip coming up. I asked her where she was going, and she said San Francisco. "Oh, that's funny," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Matt mentioned he might be traveling soon too. You guys aren't crossing paths, are you?" Her face froze for a split second. "Ha, just long enough for me to notice." "No, of course not," she said quickly, brushing it off with a laugh. "Completely different trips." I nodded, smiling on the outside, seething on the inside. I knew exactly where she was going and who she'd be with. I decided to let her go on this trip, but this time I wouldn't be sitting at home. I coordinated with Greg to follow them and document everything. More photos, more text, even video if possible. If I was going to take them both down, I needed to make sure my evidence was bulletproof. The day she left, Emily kissed me goodbye like nothing was wrong. "I'll miss you," she said, smiling as she walked out the door. I wanted to tell her right then and there that I knew everything, but I didn't. I just smiled back and said, "Have a great trip." Little did she know, the wheels were already in motion. The weekend of Emily's work trip to San Francisco, I stayed back in LA, pretending everything was normal. In reality, I had Greg tailing her. He kept me updated in real time, and what he uncovered wasn't just damning, it was almost laughably predictable. We met Matt at a boutique hotel, the kind with overpriced rooms and a chic, modern vibe. Greg was a pro. He got photos of them checking in together, holding hands, and even sneaking kisses in the lobby like two teenagers. Later that evening, he managed to snap shots of them through their room's window. I'll spare you the graphic details, but let's just say it was clear they weren't discussing spreadsheets. As if the photos weren't enough, Greg also hacked into Matt's work calendar. Don't ask me how. I didn't want to know. He found entries for off-site strategy sessions, which conveniently lined up with every one of Emily's work trips. The evidence was airtight. When Emily came home Sunday night, I was waiting for her. She walked in the door, all smiles, carrying her little suitcase like she'd just been on a spa retreat. "Hey, babe," she chirped. "How was your weekend?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her, my expression cold. She must have noticed something was off because her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" she asked. I took a deep breath, then pulled out my phone. Without a word, I opened the folder Greg had sent me and handed it to her. Picture after picture, text after text. I let her scroll through the evidence at her own pace, her face going pale as she realized what I'd uncovered. 3. Villen Abendbugel Albenchest. Care to explain? I asked, my voice calm but laced with venom. At first, she tried to deny it. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, tears already welling up in her eyes. "Matt and I are just friends. Those photos, they're out of context." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Friends? Do your friends send you naked pictures? Do they meet you in hotels for off-site strategy sessions? Cut the crap, Emily. I know everything." That's when the waterworks started. She broke down, sobbing, saying it was a mistake, that she never meant to hurt me. She blamed stress, her career, even me. "You're always so busy with work," she wailed. "I felt neglected." Neglected? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Neglected? I snapped. "I've been working my ass off to give us a good life, and this is how you repay me? By screwing my boss?" He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said, my voice icy. "You don't get to play the victim here." I didn't let her off easy. I told her I'd been gathering evidence for weeks, that I had enough to ruin both her and Matt. She begged me not to do anything rash, swearing she'd end the affair and make it right. Which made her feel gross and old and old and all. Yeah. I told her it was too late for that. That night, I packed a bag and left. I stayed at a friend's place, someone who already knew bits and pieces of what was going on. Meanwhile, I was already putting the next phase of my plan into action, bringing Matt's house of cards crashing down. The morning after I left Emelina, I met with Greg again. I handed him the full file of dirt on Matt embezzlement, sexual harassment claims he'd paid off, and now undeniable proof of his affair with an employee's wife. Greg's advice was simple. Take this straight to your company's legal team. They'll eat him alive. And this one sucked me dry entirely. Finally, the best piece of journalism I could do was finally pay down debts. And I scheduled a meeting with the company's head of HR and one of the legal advisors. I didn't just walk in with gossip. I came armed with evidence. I presented everything. Matt's shady financial dealings, the screenshots of his texts with Emily, and even the timeline of his off-site strategy sessions that lined up perfectly with company funds being misused. They were stunned. HR immediately recognized the potential fallout if this got out publicly. Legal, meanwhile, was laser-focused on the financial crimes. "We've been looking into irregularities for months," one of them admitted. "This might be the smoking gun we needed." Within 24 hours, Matt was summoned to a meeting with HR and legal. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. By the time they were done with him, his fate was sealed. He was suspended indefinitely, pending a full investigation. Word spread fast. Employees started whispering about accounting issues and inappropriate behavior. But I wasn't done. I reached out to a reporter from a local business journal who'd been sniffing around our company for months. I gave them an anonymous tip about the financial scandal and hinted at Matt's history of harassment. I didn't include the affair in my story. I didn't want to drag Emily into the public mess yet. The article dropped a week later, and Matt's reputation was obliterated. And when Emily found out Matt was under investigation, she panicked. She called me, sobbing, begging to meet so she could explain. I agreed, mostly out of morbid curiosity. We met at a cafe, and she looked like a shell of her former self. No makeup, red eyes, trembling hands. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. "Why am I doing this? Are you serious, Emily? You destroyed our marriage, and now you're surprised there are consequences?" She tried to deflect, saying she'd been manipulated by Matt, that he'd made promises about her career. I was stupid, Jack. I thought he cared about me, but he used me. I didn't buy it. "You knew exactly what you were doing," I said coldly. "You didn't care about me or us. You cared about yourself." When she realized I wasn't going to forgive her, she switched tactics. "If you take this too far, you'll ruin both of us," she hissed. "Do you really want that?" I just smiled. "Oh, Emily, I'm not ruining us. I'm just letting you and Matt reap what you sowed." Matt's suspension turned into a full termination once the investigation wrapped up. Turns out he'd been siphoning off company funds for years, not just to pay for his hotel rendezvous with Emily, but to finance a whole slew of personal expenses. The company filed a lawsuit against him, and his career in finance was effectively over. As for me, I didn't just survive the fallout, I thrived. With Matt out of the way, I was promoted to his position. Ironic, right? The same guy who tried to destroy me ended up paving the way for my biggest career win. Emily didn't escape unscathed either. Her connection to Matt became public knowledge once the affair leaked in the office gossip mill. She tried to salvage her career, but ended up quitting her job out of shame. Last I heard, she moved in with her sister upstate and was working some low-level marketing gig. She's texted me a few times since then, apologizing and begging for another chance. I haven't responded. Looking back, this whole mess taught me a lot. Betrayal doesn't just hurt, it changes you. But it also gives you clarity. I realized I deserved better than someone who could so easily lie and manipulate me. To anyone out there dealing with infidelity, my advice is simple. Don't ignore the red flags, and don't let yourself be gaslit into thinking you're crazy. Protect yourself, gather your evidence, and when the time comes, don't be afraid to fight back. Since the divorce, I've had zero contact with Emily. She tried reaching out a few more times, mostly through texts that ranged from "I miss you" to "Why are you doing this to me?" I didn't respond to any of them. There's nothing left to say. Matt, on the other hand, is a complete non-factor now. After his firing and the lawsuit from the company, his name became a cautionary tale around the office. Last I heard, he's trying to start a consulting firm, but his reputation is so trashed I doubt it'll go anywhere. Good riddance. The biggest change in my life isn't about work or relationships. It's about how I see myself. For years, I defined myself through Emily, through our marriage, and through the expectations I thought I had to meet. Losing all of that forced me to reevaluate who I am and what I want. I've learned to prioritize myself without feeling guilty about it. That doesn't mean I'm selfish. It means I've stopped pouring all my energy into people who don't reciprocate. Whether it's friendships, family, or even potential relationships, I now look for balance and mutual respect. Career-wise, things are better than ever. With Matt gone, I've had the chance to build a team that actually feels like a team. We've landed several big clients recently, and I'm finally feeling like the work I'm doing matters. Not just to the company, but to me personally. In my personal life, I'm focusing on experiences rather than milestones. I don't need a new relationship to feel whole, and I don't need to follow some timeline society expects. Instead, I'm building a life that makes me happy. More surfing, more traveling, and more saying yes to things I'd normally avoid out of fear or uncertainty. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this: betrayal doesn't define you. It feels like the end of the world when it happens, but it's not. It's just the end of one chapter. And sometimes that's exactly what you need to start a better one. And so, if you want to move forward, if you want to change, start over with some sort of clean slate. And the first step in all of this is removing the blame for it. Here are a few things I've learned. Trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Your instincts are there for a reason. Don't let yourself be gaslit. If someone makes you question your reality, take a step back and evaluate the situation objectively. Take your time to heal. There's no rush to move on. Focus on yourself first, and everything else will fall into place. Revenge isn't always bad. Okay, this one might be controversial, but sometimes justice needs a little nudge. Just make sure your actions are about accountability, not pure spite. Thank you for watching this story. Please subscribe or go to my other stories. Bye.